When my mother became pregnant with me, she decided that she was going to go to university and study computer programming. This was in Sweden in the early 1980s. My mother had worked at an art gallery and with the administration of library catalogues. Now she wanted a more secure career that could work well around having a child. Why not try computer programming? This wasn't actually a hugely surprising move at all for somebody like my mother. Nobody called her a girl boss. Nobody high-fived her for having the courage to enter a male-dominated field, because computer programming wasn't a very male-dominated field yet. As many of you might know, the first programmers in the world had been women. And for quite some time, computer programming was seen to be something that merely required an ability to follow instructions. And women were thought to be good at this. We were thought to be reliable, compliant, able to sit in neat rows and perform tasks in a set order. After all, didn't women cook from recipes, knit, sew from patterns? Was computer programming really that different? In 1967, the magazine Cosmopolitan ran an article about the growing number of job opportunities for women in computing. And it said, "It's just like planning a dinner. You have to plan ahead and schedule everything so it's ready when you need it. Programming requires patience and the ability to handle detail. Women are naturals at computer programming." So this was then, 1967. And it continued like that for a while. I am, after all, not that old. And I remember a time when at least most of my mother's managers were still women. I say still because beginning in the 1960s, the image of computer programming was starting to shift. Computer programming still broadly consisted of the same work, but the industry's importance to society was increasing. And it was starting to dawn on many male managers that communicating with these new machines, which programming is, in essence, was probably going to be pretty key. Could it really be left in the hands of women? And in Britain, actually, the government panicked so much about this that it actually launched a public scheme in order to encourage men, from the right social class, of course, to take an interest in computers. Boys needed to learn to code, and eventually they did. Tech today, of course, is associated with men. Tech today is associated with men, and it used to be associated with women. And when it was associated with women, it wasn't very high status and it wasn't very highly paid. Then, when it got associated with men, suddenly it got very high status and very highly paid. Just ask my mother. You see, I grew up to become a financial journalist. And one of the big economic questions that really started to interest me was this one. Why is it that money and status keeps following men around in the economy? What's up with that? You know, computer programming, female-dominated, not very well paid, male-dominated, suddenly very well-paid. And this has happened in many fields and in both directions. When more and more women went into biology, suddenly wages in biology dropped. So in the US, same with many design professions. And in many economies where women are now the majority of doctors, suddenly the medical profession of being a doctor is not high status anymore. How does this work? Well, you have to bear with me now, because in order to really unpack all of this, we will have to go back 5,000 years in time to the invention of the wheel. So, the wheel was invented 5,000 years ago. Big deal. And since then, the technology of the wheel has been applied to lots of different things. We have put wheels on chariots, we have put wheels on cars, we have put wheels on bicycles, we have had Ferris wheels since the late 1800s, and our friend the hamster has enjoyed the technology of the wheel since at least the 1950s, which is wonderful. Basically, there has been this, I would say, a general principle that whenever we've had something heavy that we needed to move from point A to point B, this has been made easier using the technology of the wheel. However, there is one very famous exception to this rule in the economic literature on innovation, and that's this one: suitcases. When did we put wheels on suitcases? Well, 1972, which is after we managed to put 2 men on the moon, and the same year that we drove this thing with wheels on the surface of the moon. So this is quite weird, isn't it? Lots of people have thought about this. There are Nobel Prize winners who have thought about this. However, I have come up with the answer, in spite of not being a Nobel Prize winner in economics at all. And it was pure accident, because when I was looking in British newspaper archives, I suddenly found pictures like this one, which is clearly a suitcase with wheels, and it's not from the 1970s. Because the thing is, there were actually suitcases with wheels well before 1972. The thing is that most of them were like this one, niche products for women, and hence not taken seriously by the wider industry. Because there was this idea among the large luggage companies that no man would ever roll a suitcase with wheels. Because masculinity is, unlike femininity, something that always has to be proven, right? So, and one way that men, we have to get up every day and prove that you're a real man. And one way you have to do this is by carrying heavy things. So the luggage industry just assumed that since they were making luggage for business travelers, and business travelers were obviously all men, they would never want a suitcase with wheels. And even after the official invention of the rolling suitcase in 1972, the official inventor complained of how hard it was selling it, because at this time there was this macho feeling. Men used to carry luggage for their wives. It was like the natural thing to do, I guess, he said. And that's the reason why it took 5,000 years to put wheels on suitcases: gender bias. Let me tell you another story. This is a car. This is a very famous car. This is the T Ford that was launched by Henry Ford in 1909. And his idea was to create a car that was not too expensive. He wanted a car that ordinary people could buy. And the T Ford is therefore often called a car for everyone. Which is why it's so ironic that the same year that Henry Ford launched this car for everyone, his own wife, Clara Ford goes out and buys a completely different car. She goes out and she buys this car. And the difference between this car that Henry Ford's wife buys and the T Ford is that Clara Ford's car is an electric vehicle. As many of you know, electric vehicles have been around since the very dawn of the automobile era. In London in the late 1800s, you could telephone an electric taxi company and they would come and get you. And Clara Ford's car is a very elegant electric car. I don't know if you can see it, but it actually has an inbuilt crystal vase for flowers, something you wouldn't find in the latest Tesla, unfortunately. And what I find so interesting with these early electric cars is that they were very heavily marketed towards women. There was this assumption that because the electric car was slower, more comfortable, reliable, very suitable for short distance travel in urban areas, it was a car for the ladies. And here you have the typical sort of idealized electric car driver of the time. She's got her nice car, she's got the cute shoes, she's got a huge dog. I don't know what's up with the dog, but she's got her hot man next to her in the passenger seat, obviously, and she is driving off into this bright electric future, very much in charge. But as you all know, this bright electric future didn't happen. Instead, we built a whole world for petrol-driven technology. And the main reason for this and for the disappearance of the electric car was limitations in battery technology and a couple of big investments into business models that didn't work. But there was also another thing, another cultural factor, and I think you can guess what it was. Because electric cars were so heavily associated with women and femininity and crystal vases for flowers, many male consumers didn't want them. This became a commercial problem. Here is the electric car industry in 1916 complaining. The gasoline car dealers have branded the electric as a car for the aged and infirm and for the women. Today, of course, electric cars are popular again. They also look a bit different, don't they? And this is actually a very big problem still. Gender bias when it comes to innovation. Look at how we finance innovation in our economy. Women get around 2% of all venture capital in the economy, and that's largely white women. In the US, black women, in spite of being the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs, get 0.34% of all venture capital. That is quite serious. And it has to do with this larger story that I am trying to tell you about how our definition of what's innovation and what's technology actually follows our definition of masculinity in the economy. So computer programming, when it was associated with women, it was compared to knitting and sewing. Not until it was associated with men was it possible to see it as technology or something difficult and skillful. Then look at the electric vehicles. When they were associated with women, they were hardly not even seen as vehicles. They were even talked about as drawing rooms on wheels, because if something is for women, it has to be an extension of the feminine sphere of the home. It can't be a car, can it? And the rolling suitcase. Of course, it went on to disrupt the whole global luggage industry. It's a brilliant idea, but not until it was safely associated with male business travelers in dark suits. And that's the thing. If an idea is either voiced by a woman or associated with women or femininity, then we don't listen in the same way. And any woman who has ever been in a meeting knows that this is true. And the thing is that this is important because of the economic consequences it has for women. The financial advice we tend to give to girls and women today is, go where the guys are. Go where the men are, because that's where the money and the status is as well. And the problem with this advice is that when women get over there in large enough numbers, then suddenly the money and the status disappears from that profession. So you do everything they tell you to do as a woman, you reach the finish line, and the prize they told you to chase is gone. And you assume it's you. It's not you. And my advice is, don't go where the men are. At least not for that reason. Don't go chasing the money and the status that follows our definition of masculinity in the economy. Instead, stay where you are and fight for women's ideas and professions, and ideas and professions associated with women to be taken as seriously and be backed with as much money as men's are. Fight for women's ideas to finally be heard and invested in, and given the ability to build us a new world. A world that my daughters can inhabit and shape on equal terms. And if, as a side effect to this whole economic paradigm shift, we also get cars with inbuilt crystal vases for flowers, I am very much here for that too. Thank you.